In this lecture, we'll be looking at the Great Depression as it affected the state of Ohio. In addition to the economic hardship experienced by Ohioans, the Great Depression led to a number of significant political developments, not the least of which was a number of changes in labor relations. Records on unemployment rates in Ohio during the Great Depression are somewhat imprecise and incomplete. However, some industrial centers, we can safely say, were especially hard hit during the Great Depression. The city of Toledo, which was heavily dependent upon the automobile and glass industries, seems to have been the hardest hit of all Ohio cities, with a peak unemployment rate of about 80%. The once thriving steel industry in Youngstown was especially devastated by an almost complete shutdown of demand for steel, and well over half the workers in Youngstown were out of work at the peak of the economic decline in the 1930s. Columbus and Cincinnati managed to ride out the Great Depression in better shape than the 37% statewide average unemployment in 1932. The image on this slide is from 1930, and it depicts impoverished Clevelanders being served fresh rolls and coffee. Even industrial workers who managed to keep their jobs often faced cuts in scheduled hours and weekly wages in Ohio. Many Ohioans during the Great Depression faced a struggle in providing for their families, and charitable organizations could not keep up with the massive demand for help. This photograph depicts children in the town of Circleville's Hooverville. Circleville is a town in central Ohio, just south of Columbus. Virtually every Ohio city of any significant size saw the emergence of these informal shanty towns built by the many tens of thousands of homeless and destitute Ohioans during the Great Depression. The image on this next slide was taken in 1936, and it depicts Ohio members of the Civilian Conservation Corps at a facility near Cleveland known as Camp Euclid. Approximately 14,000 Ohio residents found some work with the CCC each year of the agency's existence. Despite the tough times, Ohio remained an important political center of the country. In this 1935 photograph, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt is meeting with miners in Bel Air, Ohio, on what is sort of a pre-campaign stop. The economic troubles associated with the Great Depression led to a considerable increase in the number of labor strikes in Ohio during the 1930s. The image on this slide is of striking employees of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in 1936 as they fought with police during a march. One of the most influential strikes in Ohio during the Great Depression was the 1934 Auto-Lite Strike, which took place in Toledo, Ohio. The electric Auto-Lite company produced lighting and starting products for hundreds of different car models. In the late 1920s, the company employed over 4,000 people in its Toledo area plants. The image on this slide depicts unemployed Toledo workers in a soup line. In addition to the high Toledo unemployment rate, the city was a significant center of radical labor and political activism. Also part of the background, the automaker Willys Overland had declared bankruptcy in the early 1930s. Many local banks had failed. The city of Toledo could not afford to maintain even basic services during the economic crisis. The electric Auto-Lite company rejected calls for negotiating with workers, and it retained strike breakers in anticipation of the coming conflict. The American Workers' Party, who were considerably leftist in their views, organized the strike, and they included unemployed workers as well as the strikers from the electric Auto-Lite company. The strike, which became known as the Battle of Toledo, lasted from April 12th to June 3rd in 1934. A total of 6,000 strikers faced off against approximately 1,300 National Guardsmen, plus hundreds of local police and strikebreakers. In the ensuing violence, 2 people were killed and over 200 other people were injured. The strike garnered national media attention, and this was a key event in the formation of the United Auto Workers, the UAW. Ultimately, this strike was a win for the union workers as they received a wage increase, a new minimum wage, as well as union recognition and an arbitration process for grievances. Another major labor dispute in Ohio during the Great Depression was the Hardin County onion pickers strike, which lasted from June to September 1934. The strike was led by the Agricultural Workers Union. Strikers demanded an 8-hour day, a raise, and union recognition. Pickers were typically migrant workers from the South, and often the pickers who would show up for weeks at a time and then move on to other work were viewed as troublemakers by local residents. Now, this may or may not have been the case, but they were perceived that way. Part of this perception is class-based, and some of the anti-picker sentiment was racial in nature, as some of the migrant workers were African Americans. Hardin County is located in west central Ohio. This is a heavily agricultural region known for onions, carrots, and potatoes, in addition to soybeans and corn these days. There were once more onions grown in Hardin County than in the rest of the United States combined. In this image, an African-American picketer is being detained by Hardin County deputies and a strikebreaker, the strikebreaker being in the middle. The picketer's crime was that he violated a court-ordered limit of 2 picketers per stretch of road, which was left undefined. The judge let local authorities to determine how far apart pickers had to be, and some picketers were arrested for the, again, crime in quotation marks of being within a half mile of each other. There was a significant amount of violence in this strike. The union president, a man named Okie Odell, was kidnapped, beaten, and dumped on the side of the road by strikebreakers. Strikers at several times were forced at gunpoint to get in trucks, and then they were dumped across state lines as a way to sort of break up the strike or harass them. On the other hand, though, a bomb was detonated at the home of Godfrey Ott, who was mayor of the town of McGuffey, Ohio, and was seen as sympathetic to the onion growers. Strikers eventually won a wage increase, but they did not win recognition for the union or changes in the workday. This draws to a close our brief look at Ohio during the Great Depression.